Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Art Business Podcast. I haven't created an episode for a few weeks now, but I'm back and running again. So thank you very much, everyone, for being patient. You'll remember in the Art Business Podcast, we explore the evolving world of art, culture, and creative entrepreneurship in particular. And my name's David Bellingham. I'm Programme Director of the MA Art Business at Sotheby's Institute of Art in London. And today I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with someone who truly lives at the intersection of vision, leadership, and art. So joining me today is Anna Kuznetsova. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you.
And Anna is Managing Director of Conscious Tech BV. She's the board chair of Art Zuiderzee and a seasoned professional with more than 20 years of international experience in law, business, and for our purposes, the arts. From government contracting in Washington, D.C. to curating cultural initiatives in the Netherlands. Anna's story is a masterclass, I think, in blending strategic thinking with creative ambition. That's really her forte, if I may say so, Anna. So if you're listening in the morning, grab yourself a coffee, settle down, and let's start the conversation. So I was going to start, Anna, we've just come back from our study trip on the MA Art Business. We took our students to the Netherlands for the European Fine Art Foundation, the European Fine Art Fair, TEFAF in Maastricht in the southern Netherlands. And then we took them up to Amsterdam, and Anna was a guest lecturer on this visit. So I was just going to ask Anna whether she could say a little bit, maybe first about her experience at TEFAF, what she did with our students there, and then maybe move on to say what she did for the day in Amsterdam. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, David. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you once again. It's been only a couple of weeks since we wrapped up our Dutch trip, and indeed it was a thrilling experience, like every single time. I go to TEFAF ever since I think Sotheby's Institute of Art introduced me to it in 2011. So I've been a very diligent visitor for various purposes and assisted with some affairs as well. At this art fair, it's a truly magnificent and highly recommended venue. So obviously for everybody who's listening and has never been there, you should absolutely go and check this out. I specifically enjoy it because it gives an opportunity to really assess what is happening in the art world, to touch base with galleries, with art world players, and really immerse yourself into the fabric of the art world and share it with the students. And every time I'm thinking about various themes, what we can possibly dig into that could be really interesting and thrilling. And every time it touches upon business initiatives, business models, various decisions that people are making, including even sponsorships. So yeah, all in all, it's a very rich in experiences and an exciting opportunity. And do you want me to continue talking about Amsterdam, or shall we just?
No, I think I was going to. I think the listeners would be quite interested in hearing a little bit more about where you took the students in TEFAF and what you discussed with the people. If so long as it's not confidential, of course. Or would you? Maybe it is confidential.
No, of course it's not confidential, and I'm thrilled to share the knowledge. Well, we all know that the overall global market is feeling rather turbulent at this time with the events happening in the United States. And I was going to just check out and study how did that reflect on the art world and art market dynamics. And that's what the art fair has been showing. Normally, as we all study at Sotheby's Institute of Art, art market does not correlate with the overall global market, financial market and stock market. And that's exactly what the fair was showing. Some of the largest, most prominent pieces were sold out immediately. That showed really high confidence in the art market, and the buying power was really strong. That probably signaled that people are, or investors are, looking into art as an alternative investment asset. To some extent, we don't know that, we can't tell for sure, but certainly in the subject that we study, it shows that. Probably it shows that. So yeah, I took the students to various places. I tried to provide a diversity across different segments of the art market. I took them to a classical art gallery, to a modern art gallery of the medium size, to a gallery of the higher end, and to a niche gallery specialized in a very specific art segment, which was a wrap up of the day and gave us an overall very good perspective of various dimensions of the art market.
Excellent, excellent. And I noticed you mentioned you visited a Glasgow art gallery. That's quite interesting, because when we were with the students about 3 years ago, I think it was, in Glasgow, we did a Scottish trip to Edinburgh and Glasgow. I remember that a lot of the important dealers that we visited in Glasgow, when I spoke to them, I said, well, do you do any art fairs? And they say, no, we don't really need to. We have a good sort of like sort of micro ecology in Glasgow. We have enough collectors who are collecting our artists' work to make this, break even profitable. We don't really need to come outside of Scotland. So that's quite interesting that there's a Glasgow gallery at TEFAF. Was it an old masters, or what sector did it represent? Can you remember?
No, yeah, it was a modern art gallery, and actually it presented some of the substantial pieces, very high end, very blue chip, and that was very interesting actually. I do tend to study other subjects as well. For example, some of the galleries are choosing to be a TEFAF for various purposes, and I specifically don't mention their names because I don't know how
I know,
public that information was.
I think that's
But
tactful.
yeah, but it was really interesting to find out that some galleries ensure their presence specifically at TEFAF because museums really love to shop there. Attracted by the verification and the provenance of all the art pieces presented there. Museums really prefer that art fair over some of the others. So that's probably some of the key features why some of them are visiting. Others are really just interesting in their approach to business decision making. For example, there's a gallery from Texas that makes it all the way every year now. And I'm truly unsure what makes TEFAF an interesting venue for them, because it's a very long way and probably high expense, and I'm not so sure how does that play out in their annual expense book.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think there are all sorts of reasons why galleries are there at TEFAF, which is another reason it's very interesting, like when you're coming at it from an art business study perspective. Of course, I made an error there, because the galleries I was thinking of in Glasgow were all like with living artists, whereas you're talking about, we know that TEFAF doesn't tend to represent living artists, but it kind of ends generally with the kind of modernists, many of whom are now deceased. You get the occasional glamorous. You do get White Cube, of course, was showing people like Tracy Emin and Damien Hirst and the usuals. But as you know, Anna, that it prides itself really on being a classic art fair. And I think it's only in the last 15, 20 years, with the growth of the contemporary art market and those big branded artists like Hirst and Emin and Koons, that they started sort of showing them. But there is a resistance. It's quite conservative, I think you'd agree, TEFAF, but in a very good way. They're very good business people. They adapt to, as you said at the start, those changing circumstances in the kind of global economy as well. So moving to Amsterdam, can you tell us a little bit about, so just for the benefits of the listeners, when we go to Amsterdam, we break the students into smaller groups, and they can select from each of us something that we do that is usually connected to our own expertise. In fact, this year, for example, I usually take students to Street Art Museum Amsterdam, and in fact, 2 podcasts back, I did a podcast with Anna Stolarova, who's the director of SAMA, as it is, which you might like to listen to. But this year we didn't go there because Anton Kiefer was showing very important exhibition shared at the Van Gogh Museum that we all went to, had lecture from the chief curator there, which was amazing, saw the Kiefer, and then you moved on to the Stedelijk. So that's what I was doing. But Anna, tell us what you did with your students that day.
Well, I thought I should give something different for a variety to students because Dutch museums are indeed very famous and they always throw thrilling exhibitions, absolutely must see. So I'm really glad students had the chance to cover that. On another end, I took them first to an artist studio of Berend Strik. Berend Strik is one of the prominent artists in the Netherlands. Who is a very interesting person. And that's actually what I personally like about the art world is the connection to people and to artists predominantly, because they're just incredible people with such rich inner world that we have a chance or rather a glimpse to see through their artwork. Well, at least that's how I perceive it. And oftentimes they're really good speakers. So I wanted students to have a chance to first experience meeting an artist that is truly conceptual in his thought and advanced. And also I wanted to explore once again business strategies behind some of his decisions because his gallery, which he's been a part of for several decades, is now closing because the owner is retiring and deciding to completely and permanently close and remove his name from the gallery. I'm talking about Von Swelter's gallery. And it's been one of the probably top 2 galleries in the Netherlands. All of a sudden, we're experiencing this event happening. And it was just very interesting, I thought, to ask directly artist who is with that gallery, what is his thinking? What is his plan of action? What is the strategy? What is the thought behind this? And how did he specifically assess the gallery's action, some maybe pitfalls or some correct actions? What was his assessment? So in the end, it was 2.5 hour trip and students refused to leave. Yeah, so apparently it was very successful. And I'm thinking that, yeah, we should probably continue this format because it was very interesting. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and then there was a second leg. I don't know if I should just continue right in or you have.
No, do. Yes, so because it was a day, you actually had a day. I think most of us just did a half day or maybe 2 half days each. But tell us what you did in the afternoon.
Well, in the afternoon, we went to Framer Framed, which is a very peculiar, thrilling name for an initiative that has recently celebrated 25 years, I believe. And this concept is very unusual because it's sort of an artistic social hub that invites local people, local community to take direct part in activities of the foundation themselves. So they now have a place in the east of Amsterdam, very spacious on the bank of a canal, absolutely gorgeous, beautiful space. And they run some really relevant, socially, politically active projects that are really important and interesting for everybody to see. And I think because they're sort of on the side of the roadmap around Amsterdam art world, not everybody has a chance to visit, but we did. We made that trip, and it was definitely worth it. So we also explored their business model. We have seen what kind of practices they have and what kind of sustainable funding routes they have chosen for themselves. So all in all, it was a very interesting trip.
Fantastic. And just a couple of other highlights. Colleagues, also a couple of my colleagues who are art lawyers, or more interested in art law. One's a lawyer and one is actually interested as a provenance researcher. Took a group of students to the Heights Museum and looked at some contestable objects there with an expert who works on that material. So that there's a lot of, as you remember, Anna, because Anna is, by the way, an alumna of the Art business. So we have quite a lot of law and ethics because you know students are the art world is the art market in particular is very untransparent, as we're already discovering in our discussion of TEFAF to a certain extent. And so to understand the legal and ethical principles is very important, I think, when you go into the art world. Anyway, talking about the art world, I was going to ask you, Anna, now, what originally drew you into the art world? So we're going back in time now. Was there maybe a moment or an experience that made you say to yourself, this is it, this is what I want to explore?
Yeah, there was a moment. I think it was not too far from my birth, if I may. As a child, I've discovered that I was particularly attracted to the art, or making the art myself, rather. I think by the age of 20, I was already a member of Union of Artists and then at some point I had an experience where I got disappointed in my own art, to the extent where I just started to believe that I'm far more attracted to other people's art rather than my own. And from that moment, I've dedicated part of my life to being immersed in the art world in a different capacity rather than an artist.
Excellent. And I know that you've written on, I think you titled the piece "The Ascendance of Chinese Art in the West," and that you've incorporated some of that academic research material on Chinese art in the West into some of your lectures. Maybe you could talk about that research into, what surprised you most during that research into what you then titled "The Ascendance of Chinese Art in the West."
Well, I love academic work all in all, because you never know what comes out of that research. You come with an open mind and suddenly something so thrilling pops up. And that was exactly the case for this specific research, which I did for my scholarship winning essay at Sotheby's Institute of Art. But yeah, I think the discovery was completely unexpectedly that the entire theme and topic of the value of Chinese art in the West was under question. And how does the West value arts that aren't necessarily Western in its nature? Because oftentimes it could be misunderstood or misperceived, and certainly does not ever achieve the same price values as in their respective countries. So in China, taken as a particular place of research, I have realized throughout the research that the West has indeed accepted Chinese artistic thought and methodologies much easier and better if they were communicated with the Western media, or let's say a visual language that the West is used to seeing. Some of the traditional patterns, maybe if you talk about, let's say, an oil painting, which is not so typical for a Chinese traditional art, but once you adopt that into practice, then suddenly West has a chance to better perceive and understand the subject matter. So that was probably one of the strongest concepts that came out of this research. And it helps not just in its application to the art world, but all in all, to understand the cross-cultural communication and relations. So the conclusion from that research can be extrapolated to other spheres of our conduct.
Yeah, because I think traditionally I'm actually finishing off some work on a book on collecting in the 18th century, which is edited by my colleague at the Institute, Barbara Lassett, who works in the MA Fine and Decorative Art Design. And I try to I try to say something about the attitude of European collectors to increasingly interest, obviously, in Chinese and Japanese art in particular, and Indian. And you find these in the kind of auction records of the 18th century when these objects appear. And I look at the kind of language used to describe those objects and compared to Rembrandt and Titian and so on. And there are subtle differences, as I'm sure that you might expect. That kind of notion of Orientalism, as we call it in inverted commas now, and exoticism about these objects is what they're using to sell them in the kind of auction catalogues. I think your research was also about we saw this happening very much in London. Suddenly at Sotheby's, Christie's, and the big auction houses, we start seeing Chinese contemporary art, Zhang Zhaogang, etc., appearing, and selling for a lot of money. And I think you're right in saying that those works are they're doing well because they are using traditional Western media. They're recognizable to our Western eyes, and in terms of contemporary art, they were recognizable as well. And I believe a lot of these artists were being trained in the West very often, and then adopting and mixing their kind of Chinese experience with the Western experience. Certainly, I think the most successful of those contemporary works, which still are to a certain extent, are a mixture of they're obviously Chinese, but they're also in a very Western style. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I know you've studied Chinese culture and language in Beijing. So I was just going to ask you, how's your experience in Chinese studies, if we can call it that, shaped your approach to art in general, and particularly in terms of your understanding, as we all now have to understand the global art world, which is what we try to focus on in the program, obviously. But how has your Chinese studies assisted that understanding?
Oh, well, certainly any cross-cultural studies broaden the views. And that's what, first and foremost, I must admit that being truly global in one's perspective and having a specific experience, not just reading about the country, but immersing oneself into the language, into the country, and actually living there has helped tremendously to understand a different culture, to be more open-minded towards a different culture, to understand some of the nuances of cultural perspectives, and all in all, better understand the common grounds also across the cultures. That's probably was one of the biggest discoveries when I was conducting my studies, that with all the tremendous differences we see, there's still also tremendous common grounds and common perspectives. For instance, there is an insight that I would love to share, is that regardless which culture that is, art is always speaking the truth. So that kind of honesty in art, that bravery in art, is what stuns people across the globe, regardless the culture. For example, in China, we know a groundbreaking artist, Sotheby, who has invented his own specific, almost impressionist style methodology of visual expression after studying it for decades, and is being now valued and appreciated to some of the highest extents. And this is something also that's common to be appreciated in the West, that kind of study, the kind of insights and groundbreaking features that artists are developing, that are coming out of some kind of purity, some kind of honesty within the artist, within the person. And that's what definitely is shared.
Yeah, I remember we had a kind of informal conversation on the coach trip between Maastricht and Amsterdam. Anna, you and I had that conversation. We were talking about just that, about what, this constant discussion that I have with both students and colleagues about. We often talk about what makes what makes a great artist. I hate using that word great, but that's, we all know what we mean by that. And we try to find some sort of common features that kind of almost have to exist in every artist that we think deserves to be given that adjective. Um, and that was one of the things that came out in that conversation, that if an artist isn't true to themselves, they end up creating something that is just not going to last, arguably. And there's a lot of pressure, I think, on artists, always has been, to, I think, throughout, even in classical antiquity, I could give examples of artists need to make a splash. They need to create something that today we might even call kind of like commercialized, because they need attention. And if they don't get that attention, of course, we in the UK we have this system of, there's a group of artists who maybe don't grab that attention in the same way as the more commercial artists, where they're given public money to put in an installation in Tate Modern. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be popular in the sense of private collectors wanting their work. It's often not that attractive to put in your house, but it's a very different kind of art. But arguably, I would argue both of those types of artists are still being honest. And I think there's quite a lot of art historians and art critics that are a bit snobbish about the more commercial side of the more commercial artists, who are trying to earn a living without public money, if that makes sense. We had a great conversation anyway.
Yeah, David, and I can't agree more. I think it would be a nice subject for a study to really assess the levels of honesty across artworks and artists and their approach, especially some of them are trying to be indeed a more of a stunt artist rather than artists,
Yeah.
and how successful that could be in the long run. That could be a very interesting academic study indeed.
Well, we wait. I will not be around in 100 years to go into Tate Modern and see whether some of these artists are already there. And we're already having those conversations about, will Hearst last? Will Rachel White-Reed, Tracy Emin, Kusama, will they all last? Which it's a really interesting conversation. We'll never know the answer to that. And so moving now, Anna, you you have really interesting mix in your portfolio. You're not only involved in art, which we've just been talking about, but you also lead in government contracting and investment. I was going to ask how do you balance those two worlds of trying to or incorporating art into your business activities and investment activities?
Well, thank you for this question, David. I think yeah, it's interesting indeed. I think I really like the dramatic difference of those two worlds. And if you're stuck in one, I'm not so sure how long you can be in it without a little bit tainting it with your perception. If you're completely in art 24/7, that could sometimes also be, well, I don't want to say negative. I just want to say that maybe you just need the diversity.
Mhm.
You do need the diversity to gain that different perspective, completely different perspective on the world in order to understand art to its fullest extent. And vice versa. Art always gives me an opportunity to look at things differently in my other realms of professional activities. Specifically, yes, now I do manage an investment fund and we do government contracting, which is a very robust and rigid framework of laws, and there's so little space for creativity that coming out of that realm back into art feels like a huge liberation. So I suppose that's the kind of feeling I'm striving to get out of it.
Yeah, and I've noticed that in my conversations, my personal conversations, if you like, with you, Anna, that you and in a lot of my students, when I'm interviewing candidates for the MA, I find that particularly the more mature, more experienced students, they might have been a lawyer for a few years, and there's something missing in that world for them, and they come to us to study art business, and then sometimes they will then go back into law, but into art law, and the conversation is very much about, I need that enrichment of art in my life. I can't. I'm starved otherwise in the work I do. I mean, that's a trope that you read all the time in the newspapers about people who are very unhappy. They can be very successful and very wealthy, but they kind of need something else. And I think that art is often that extra something, which I guess is why at TEFAF we see these high-end works not just being bought by museums, but by private collectors, because very often these people aren't working in the art world, but they have the art at home to create that balance in their psychology. I mean, it's a fairly obvious thing to say in some ways, but I think what we're getting at is that art is can be a healing principle in anyone's life.
Absolutely, David, you're absolutely right in that, and healing is the right word as well. I do feel like I'm being healed from my government contracting.
Yeah, it was good. It was a nice opportunity for you to be immersed more in that world. So, when we were in the Netherlands, I could see that. But at the same time, I can see that you're coming at it with this really interesting perspective, which I think the students very much appreciated, as this kind of quite pragmatic business mind of Anna Kuznetsova as well. So I just wanted to talk about one of those I wanted to talk about the Art Zuiderzee, because we spoke a little bit about that when we were in the Netherlands. Art Zuiderzee, and we'll put a link for people, on the podcast. But it's, as I understand it, this spans an area of the Netherlands of about 400 kilometers, which is quite incredible, really, for an art organization. So could you tell us more, what inspired the initiative of Art Zuiderzee, and what are you hoping it brings to a more international art scene?
Well, first and foremost, I think listeners will question, where is 400 kilometers in such tiny country as the Netherlands? Where can you find them? Well, you can if you try. Actually, Zuiderzee is the historical region of, it's a body of water that lies within the country. If you look at the map, you will see that it's been partially built out with polders. The route is a historical route that takes you on a bike or on a boat or by any other means. You can go by car as well around that region to appreciate rich history of the region, which essentially has formed the strongest features, some of the strongest. Okay, I shouldn't be so direct here, of the Dutch national identity. It's that seafaring region from which the ships sailed out to discover new lands, to open trade routes, and essentially bring back that wealth of experience and trade into the country. So obviously the region itself is very significant and full of historical locations. So Art Zuiderzee has been formed by specifically a person whose roots, personal roots, are from the region historically. And you can consider that a local initiative, essentially, a community building initiative, an initiative that will allow the region to be united once again into a circle with a spotted exhibitions that will create that kind of circle that you can go around. You can explore both historical aspects of the region, but you can also explore a contemporary emerging art along the way, which would be site specific. So the project's supposed to run over a couple of months in the summer, and we'll invite local and international guests to have that kind of experience. And I think a specific feature about it that makes it really different and interesting is that it's a biking route and it's a yachting route. So this is something, some of the key features of the Netherlands as well. And yeah, international art world can come over and experience that on top of the art.
It's a great idea. I love the idea. I'm a walker. I believe that walking is also a very therapeutic activity along with experiencing art. And so I love the idea of like a route that it's in a context as well. That's what I like about it. As you say, I mispronounced it. It's the Zuiderzee.
Zuiderzee, yeah, it's
Zuiderzee.
Zuiderzee,
And of course,
yeah.
the Zee part is the sea.
Mhm.
And I love the idea that it links in with like the trading powers of historic Netherlands, and we think of the East India, the Dutch East India Company, and at the moment, obviously, we're very interested in colonization and post-colonial studies as well. When I was talking about those 18th century works from China and Japan coming in, obviously that's coming in very much because of what many people today would see through a kind of imperialist lens and an exploitation lens. But at the same time, like anything else, it kind of led to an enrichment of the culture back in the West, if that makes sense. So I love the idea of placing these works and going on a journey to experience like contemporary works, but in a historical context. It's great. So I just wanted to come to back to something a bit more academic. We spoke earlier about your scholarship-winning essay on the ascendancy of Chinese art that got you into Sotheby's Institute. But you also wrote an article on, correct my pronunciation, Bogomazov's Painting and Elements. So what stood out to you when placing Bogomazov's work alongside other artistic thinkers, I think we could call them, such as Malevich and Kandinsky, working in the early decades of the 20th century?
Bogomazov is a Ukrainian artist,
Yes.
and his work and his impact in the art world is truly significant and substantial, but it has not been discovered until recently. And that's what probably stands out all in all, is that even up till today, we're still discovering new names that are actually old names, the names that we should have known already, but we're just coming across them now. And this is what Bogomazov is about. It's really interesting to discover that he has published an essay on painting and elements, a groundbreaking essay in 1914, I believe, which is almost a decade earlier than Malevich, already proposing some of the abstract ideas about color and line prior to Malevich and Kandinsky together. So he should have been along them in the art historical books, referring to first emergence of these ideas. But he wasn't, because his oeuvre has been lost. And in fact, there was a significant story how his wife has been able to salvage some of his work and was trying to hide it from the Soviet government, moving it in crates under a threat of her life. And essentially, all of that work has been discovered in some kind of a basement. And that's how we've learned about this significant artist. And now, of course, we have access to his work. And I think first time it was presented at to the wide artistic community. It was presented at TEFAF in 2016 by James Butterwick Gallery and Kröller Müller Museum, which is my favorite, in fact, museum.
In the Netherlands.
Yes, in the Netherlands, indeed.
With an amazing collection of famous collection of Van Goghs, but also very good on arte povera, the Italian movement.
Absolutely, yes. It's very it's a significant museum, but too bad that not too many people know about it. I think the word should spread.
We did stop off actually between Maastricht and Amsterdam one year with the students, and it was great. Yeah, remember cycling around. They have free bicycles to cycle around the place as well.
Yeah, it's very entertaining. It has a sculpture park as well, so
Right. I was
a
just
lot to
thinking
do.
about the idea as cycling around as well.
Yeah, yeah. But also, Kröller-Müller Museum is very strong in their research. And the moment they saw Bogomazov's work and realized the dates on those works, they immediately, I think, acquired about 7 pieces into their permanent collection. So that's an immediate sign of institutional recognition of the artist. And ever since, his work has been disseminated across some of the biggest museums worldwide.
Yeah, and has an interesting contemporary socio-political dimension to a certain extent with what was then, presumably they bought them from James Butterworth in 2016 at TEFAF, yeah. And you know, already things were beginning to bubble up between Russia and Ukraine in terms of the future you know, invasion. And so and you were also talking historically about how the works were hidden from the Soviet authorities. Presumably there are parallels there with degenerate art in Germany, which the Nazis were keen to kind of destroy, so people had to kind of collect and hide that as well. We've seen a lot of exhibitions about those works being suddenly rediscovered, or the way they were protected by non-Nazi sympathizers in the Second World War. Similar things happening in the Soviet Union, of course, with the control of artistic production.
Yeah, well, Bogomazov, in that sense, has made a substantial contribution to the art history by developing some of the first abstract works.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm thinking actually there is a parallel in my experience, which is Barbara Hepworth, the British modernist sculptor, because I remember doing a course on gender and artists in the 1980s for Birkbeck College, and they said choose a couple of case studies, a male and a female artist, and I looked at Henry Moore, who at the time had a massive bibliography, academic bibliography, loads of exhibition, you know, and I compared for the students Hepworth's you know, how many academics were working on her then? Very, very few. And now, of course, it's changed. It's almost the other way around with feminism and so on, developing out of that. And you know, Hepworth is as big as Henry Moore now in both cultural terms, international cultural terms, but also in terms of the market. And I think one of the things that came out of that as well is that arguably Barbara Hepworth was one of the first artists to pierce the form in sculpture, you know, and has been kind of ignored as part of that early development of abstract sculpture because of male, much more famous artists, you know, working out of Paris at the time. So it is interesting the way these artists are forgotten, and then we rediscover them and we can reposition them in the history of art. What I was going to just finishing with Bogomazov, do you think the theoretical framework such as Cubo-futurism that he was theorizing still influence artists and collectors today? I mean, obviously collectors in terms of James Butterworth finding at least a museum, the Kröller-Müller Museum, to collect the work. But do you think there's an interest from the art world in general towards that movement today?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, well, I'm personally friends with some people that collect, and it is clear that once they see the historical significance of the art, it attracts far more interest rather than just a newly produced art that dwells on those ideas that were already discovered by somebody else beforehand. So a truly authentic idea would always attract more attention than a derivative from that idea in contemporary world. In fact, the later you discover, then you would like to repeat someone, the less probably valuable your attempt would be. So that's a general rule. For these authentic pieces, for these authentic thoughts, there's always a genuine interest.
Yes, and Anna, coming back to your studies in London, you studied at Sotheby's Institute of Art in London, as we've heard, but also at London Business School in Regent's Park. They're two, in some ways, very different, but I think both in their own terms. You know, London Business School with that more academic business brand, maybe, and Sotheby's with its brand related to the art market. What would you say are the biggest takeaways from studying, you know, almost like pure business at London Business School and then art business at Sotheby's? Can you think of what those studies have given you in your career today, in your work today?
Well, absolutely. I still consider that my course in Sotheby's Institute of Art is an MBA in art business. It could be considered such. It gives tremendous insights into the business of art specifically, and art as an alternative investment asset for that matter. And I think this is where probably the intersection is when you start looking at the numbers, when you start looking at business models and patterns of thinking around the business. This is where it starts to correlate with what London Business School is teaching. I took a strategic agility course there, which was very insightful, and I think it really prepared me for these turbulent times, I must say. This is how you, essentially adapt to the advances of the current world. And now you see that we, every week almost, or sometimes every day, there's something completely new that you have to adapt to, adjust to, or in fact, it would be even better if you looked ahead. To see what's coming and invented certain things that could be authentically yours, just like in art, in business. It is still very relevant to be authentic to yourself and to your core values, out of which you stream with new business ideas, and then hope that this will take off and you would not be left behind by those world advancements.
Staying ahead of the game, I guess. Yeah, and we've already spoken a little bit about you know, historically, but also in the 21st century, about trends shifting across continents. You know, collecting trends, Chinese art, and so on. What do you think are the most exciting changes happening in the art market right now? Today,
Well,
you know, a snapshot of the art world. What's happening that you think is exciting, maybe in terms of potential future development?
Well, I have some of my own ideas, actually. We all
That's
know
what
that,
we
of
want to hear.
course, there are really crazy changes and crazy new things with AI being an artist these days, with NFTs from a couple of years back. All sorts of things are disruptive to the traditional sense of the art market. However, I do believe, and this is where my bold idea is coming from, I do believe that art is something truly personal, and great art, again, when we fall back to the things that we discussed not too long ago, you and I, during this podcast, to the kind of sense of truth that comes out from within. Yeah, it comes from experience, from personal identity, from philosophy, from various features of the artist that can be only immersed in out of a person, you know, not from a machine only capitalizes on what's already been produced, so it's a derivative product and it will always be such. So a truly unique and authentic artwork can only probably come from a human being. And this is where I hope and believe the art world will go back into after it's come down with with euphoric new technologies. Um, and that's the kind of art I appreciate. And once again, it's a human touch, it's a personal connection, it's a connection that sometimes you're lucky enough to establish with an artist who's living still, or you establish that connection through an artwork by a visual language, reading of that language. In either case, it gives you something completely unique and personal and evokes feelings predominantly, yeah, and certain senses that only a human interaction can do.
That's very interesting actually, because Alex Hetzter, I did a podcast with, and he's very much pro machine learning in the product. He does it himself. He's an artist as well, working with AI and so on. And I think that personally, I'm quite convinced by his argument that, because he's an art historian, he's a trained art historian as well, and he often uses things like Byzantine coins in his lectures, puts them alongside a CryptoPunk image, for example, and talks about the spirituality of the coin, which is often stamped with an image of God or the Holy Spirit or whatever, and then is saying, well, is that spiritual stamp still in like AI created work? And he kind of argues that it is, and I think that there is an argument, is there not? I mean, I'm just thinking about Anselm Kiefer as an example of that direct physical impact and truth from an artist. And anyone who can't get out to Amsterdam, an adapted version of that shows, for example, coming to London to the Royal Academy, and they will see this. They will see this. He uses, for example, what we now call immersiveness, but they're traditional canvases, obviously, albeit not traditional. This is the point I'm trying to make, that they're using strange materials, obviously, and he's three-dimensionalizing the canvases, putting lead in and non-traditional materials. And so there's kind of an argument that if an artist gets it right and explains it properly, they can show that their truthfulness is still somehow working with the machine learning, with the AI, to produce that final product. I guess it remains to be seen how far that goes, but at the moment I'm not totally convinced, and I kind of agree with you that the big experiences I had when I was in the Netherlands was certainly in terms of what could be described as more traditional, works that are physically present in front of you without any kind of like AI or NFTs behind them. But I think the jury's out on that to a certain extent. We wait to see how artists respond to that, whether they can produce truthful works that aren't totally kind of like manufactured by, dredging the internet, if you like. What I was going to ask you, Anna, as well, is for people maybe I'm aware that I have no idea who listens to these podcasts, by the way, because at the moment, I've never had any feedback. I've never put possibilities of feedback. Anecdotally, when I speak to people, I know kind of things that they like and so on. And I know that some people, they listen to these and it gets them into the art world. I've met someone who said that I listened to a podcast and it made me really interested in art. And I went to an exhibition and looked at it seriously for the first time. So for anyone listening who's just starting out in the art world, whether an artist or a collector or a consumer, if you like, what advice would you give when entering the art business and the art world today? Where would you start? How would you embrace that?
Well, that's a very interesting question, David. Actually, I asked to some extent that question to Berend Streeck during the studio visit as well. How does he find his way around the art world? Yeah, how do we all find our ways? From where do we begin? I started as a young artist, essentially. Yeah, and that was my entry point. But how do people find their ways into the art world? You can start with your own genuine interest in something, yeah, whatever attracted you to the art world in the first place, to the art even, not necessarily the world. You don't need to engulf the entire art world immediately, otherwise it might appear to be really scary. Start small, start with items that genuinely interest you, approach with questions, approach people that are relevant to that point of interest, start talking to them. And this would be a possibility to see what is needed. And this is probably one of my strongest advices out there, is not to try to impose your own vision onto people or actors, players in the art world, but rather be curious be collaborative, be listening, and seeing what is needed, where can you, with your set of skills and interests, can benefit a structure or a framework that's already established. And that could be much easier. This is where I actually have made a lot of mistakes, because I assumed that I had a unique vision, which I'm going to now deliver to the world. Well, wrong. It's good to have unique vision, obviously, but you also need to be really conscious about what kind of system is already in place and where your vision can fit in seamlessly. And the better it fits, the more likely you are to be successful in what you do. And I'm purposefully not telling any given scenarios in this sense, because it can be completely different. It could be very innovative. It could be something that nobody has ever done before, as long as it's a combination of the need and your authenticity merged, blended together. And that's where the success is coming. And that's where the entry point into the art world could be.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. I think a lot of people, it's natural for a human being to feel overwhelmed. I'm never going to be an expert on this. It's something we all feel when we're in the art world. And so I would say to people, when you go to a gallery, particularly a public gallery, don't try and tick everything off. Stand in a room and look at one work. Much more valuable and then go back another day and look at another one. Because people feel overwhelmed, I think, by the sheer complexity of the art world. And I often say to my students, you can only actually, we're giving you some tools and we're pushing you out there into the ocean of the art world, but you will only learn from years of experience. We all know that. I know that. When I shifted from antiquities to needing to know much more about modern contemporary when I went into art business, I was panicked. I didn't know how to say what was good contemporary art, what was not good. You learn, but hopefully I've begun to learn. But I think the other thing you would agree with is that you spoke about authenticity. Be true to yourself. Don't care about what someone else says about something. If you like it, that's you, and you investigate that. Listen to yourself, because that's what art is about. It's not like, I was about to say like mathematics, but mathematics, if you speak to a mathematician, they say how exciting and scary that can be as well. Whereas I was about to say, 2 + 2 = 4. So we know that. Whereas a Picasso versus a Kandinsky doesn't equals something else, if you like. So, but ask AI. We're having this conversation. It's well known. If you ask AI, sometimes what is 2 + 2, it often gets it wrong.
Yeah, AI is notoriously bad in calculations, but it's getting better, hopefully. Yeah, David, I think it's a very important conversation. And I think there's nothing wrong in being a niche specialist or having your interest in something rather isolated
Yeah,
and small and not knowing the worldwide.
really, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. uh,
If you think of Vincent van Gogh, it's kind of
yeah.
where he went right, but where he went wrong. He didn't. When you read his work, he strongly admires Courbet and the French realists who came before him in particular. But he's very definitely kind of working. He's not looking at other contemporary artists that much. He's very definitely being honest to himself. And his art isn't selling, but he remains. And look at him now.
Well, yeah, and that's what dedication to your core gives you. It actually, sooner or later, this will be appreciated. And I'm not only talking about the artist. This could be a researcher or an art business specialist who takes specific interest in this one niche. It becomes a profound specialist in that niche, and that's good enough.
I think so. Yeah. And so don't panic about the fact you don't know that bigger world. That will come naturally, you know.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, um, I just wanted to ask you on a lighter note, kind of lighter, but actually very serious. who at the moment, because I know when people ask me this question, I said, well, if you'd asked me yesterday, it would have been a different artist. But who, a favorite artist and why? Just briefly, of Anna Kuznetsova, who's your favorite artist? If you had to choose one to take to a desert island.
Well, David, you probably know that these are some of the most difficult questions that nobody will give you a straightforward answer
Just
unless they
comes to mind at
prepare.
the moment that you're engaged with, particularly. That's all.
Um, you know, I'm engaged with a certain type of art that has a little bit of wit about it.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily like too much, too difficult, too hardcore art
Yeah.
that sucks you into a kind of a hard thinking and never lets you go. So I like Cy Twombly. He's playful, he's a little bit childish, and in that way I see a reflection of myself in his work.
Yeah, absolutely. You know why I like him? Because of his classicism, his quotations from Sappho, Catullus, etc. That's what drew me to him. Cy Twombly was also one of the first artists to be exhibited at the Dulwich Picture Gallery, you know, in terms of interventions and comparing, cross-collecting, cross-display. With Poussin in the Dulwich Picture Gallery, they put Cy Twombly's in there, and it worked nicely because Poussin is a neoclassical artist with a lot of classical mythology, and Twombly is interested in that as well. But they look completely different, but it was a wonderful comparison and experience. And what about a museum that you never get tired of?
Well, that's a Curly Miller. I already gave you a hint earlier, but I think it's just amazing to explore art in such setting. It has two sections. It has a permanent exhibition indoors with over 90 pieces of Van Gogh and some other really critically important art. And also it has an outdoor sculpture park which positions works in a very unusual nature settings. And I love seeing art in nature.
Absolutely. I don't think when you were on the course, we went to St. Ives, or did we?
I don't think I was there with
No.
you
So when we go to St.
at
Ives
that
now, which we're
time.
going to do this year, I was just thinking about what you said about Kronemüller and the sculpture park in nature. So we
Yeah.
visit the Tremenhere sculpture park, which is on the coast near Penzance, and the Neil Armstrong who runs it, he's actually a medical practitioner and still working, but he has a love of botany and plants, because Cornwall you can put a lot of exotic plants in because of it's a almost tropical climate, but he loves art as well. So he has a sculpture park, which is deliberately a collection of equally important plants, some of them rare, in a beautiful natural setting on a hillside with streams, with contemporary sculpture, which is kind of similar to your Krola idea. I was going to also ask you, is there any book that maybe has changed your perspective when you've read, or any writings? You've already spoken about the artist, but
Well, I suppose you also want to learn about my most recent experiences. However, I did read the itinerary of questions and I really had to think about it. And I'm just coming back to some of the most profoundly impactful books in my life. And it is Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. Sorry for being trivial here, but I think
no.
it's just such a wealth of philosophy and knowledge and different perspectives on life that I just can't get over it yet. And I'm already 47.
Great choice. So you take that to your desert island, and maybe finally a dream exhibition that if you were asked to curate a dream exhibition, what would you exhibit?
I wish you gave me more time for this question. It wasn't a blitz because I love the idea of curating a Russian contemporary art exhibition titled Void as a Resource.
Mm,
Yeah, it's something new and it's something that I'm currently researching. It is very unusual to have a void perceived as a resource, but it is indeed de facto how some of the current Russian artists perceiving the void. And I'm just interested in that research and seeing where that would lead.
fantastic. Um, so uh, coming to an end now. So I was just going to ask listeners that if they enjoyed this conversation and the podcast, please don't forget to like, subscribe, maybe share it with a fellow art lover or business entrepreneur, and as both, I would say. And in the meantime, until next time, stay inspired, stay curious, as Anna said. And I'd like to thank Anna on behalf of all the listeners for those wonderful insights into her world. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It was a pleasure.